And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
Go ahead and say it, Ed. Go Dragons!
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
You like that? You like that?
F it. Jamar's down there somewhere.
The New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport.
No!
Splash Brothers. Yep.
It's playoff. Keep going, Brace.
The playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Any changes in those games, that's what all this is based off of, all the games played before Monday Night Football. Also going to cover some news and headlines after Week 8. Number one, which hits close to home to most of us and important to all of us, the Saints are back on track after playing at home against Las Vegas Raiders. They won a 24-0 shutout, which their defense looked really good. Andy Dalton looked real efficient and like a true game manager. They seemed to really feature Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara, which it should be no surprise as they're their biggest playmakers. But Chris Olave also got fairly involved, and Raheed Shaheed. So those are some key players for the Saints getting back on track, and we'll see if they can keep that going. They play on Monday night coming up in Week 9 at New Orleans against Baltimore. So that'll be a big test to see how our defense, where it's at against a Baltimore offense. It's somewhat struggling with some pass catchers being out right now. We'll talk about that in a little bit more, but also just not moving the ball as well as they were earlier on in the year. And if our defense can keep it going against them, that'll be a good test. And their defense is not as good as it has been, but is playing good enough. If our offense can really put it on them, then that'll give a lot of Saints fans a lot of hope for the rest of the year, especially with Andy Dalton at the helm. Welcome back, DJ Moore. Put up a monster game this week. Honestly, if y'all listened to earlier in the podcast, then you know both Josh and late last week on our starts, both Josh and I had DJ Moore as a start. Just felt like him and PJ Walker were really getting a good connection going. Another 11 target game, 6 catches, 152 yards and a touchdown. Honestly, these are the type of games the last 2 weeks that we really expected from DJ Moore all year. If you hung on to him and stuck through it, good for you. If you trade him away, kind of stinks, but I hope whatever you got in return is working out for you. Next, moving on, Tony Pollard. Is he running away with the job? I mean, he definitely looked like it. You know, Zeke was out. We expected a big week from Tony Pollard. We know he's got the potential. It just needed the chance to really run away with the job. And honestly, he did. 14 rushes, 131 yards, 3 touchdowns, and then a catch for 16 yards. I mean, against a pretty decent Chicago run defense. So honestly, I mean, if his role doesn't expand when Zeke comes back, then Dallas coaches are just ostriches with their heads in the sand, just don't want to face the fact that Tony Pollard's a lot better running back than Zeke is now. But look great. We'll have to see what happens whenever Zeke comes back. Also, Jimmy G, CMC, and Debo who? Honestly, Jimmy G, CMC, and the 49ers offense looked great against the Rams defense, who's really struggled this year, but coming off a tough loss to Kansas City last week. CMC, first player since 2005 to throw for a touchdown, run for a touchdown, and catch a touchdown. And honestly, Kyle Shanahan's magical offense featured CMC a lot. And if you have CMC and hung on through the Carolina woes, you should be super excited. And I think Jimmy G is going to be a huge beneficiary of CMC in that offense. And I like him rest of season as a top 12 quarterback, no doubt, maybe even like top 8. They're on a bye this week, so he's probably going to get dropped if he was picked up in any. And if you have a good quarterback with a bye coming up and a bench stash spot, I'd pick up Jimmy G in that spot. And honestly, I think he's matchup proof with their offensive capabilities. I don't care what defense they're playing. I don't think there's one good enough in the NFL to hold them back this year, especially with what Chicago did to Dallas's defense this week. Dallas's defense to me was probably the best in the league, and they showed vulnerability against Chicago this week, which we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I like Jimmy G, and CMC really got a good chemistry going, and San Francisco looks like maybe a front runner in the NFC. And then A.J. Brown just caught another touchdown. No, I'm just kidding. But honestly, I've got him on several teams, and I got a notification. It seemed like every 10 to 15 minutes that he caught a touchdown, and I thought that maybe my app was messing up or that it was just behind, but no. Caught 3 touchdowns, and hang on, I'll tell you how many yards. Yep, caught 3 touchdowns for 156 yards, 6 catches. I mean, just killed it. Honestly, exactly what we expected from A.J. Brown come to this team after the first couple of weeks when he was really featured. Really featured again against the Pittsburgh defense has been struggling, and he's got some cake matchups coming up. If you could trade high for A.J. Brown right now, I would do it in a heartbeat. Houston, Washington, Green Bay, Tennessee, then the Giants, which are kind of a tough matchup, but I mean, you got a solid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight weeks of really plus matchups until you hit the Giants, which is kind of tough. But then you got Chicago, which is not looking as good. Dallas, which is kind of tough. But then New Orleans, hopefully our secondary, and that'll be for the playoffs, our secondary is back, and Lattimore will be back. But even if not, A.J. Brown almost looks unstoppable right now. And that pretty much rounds out our news and headlines. Moving on to our injuries. Thank goodness this is a week, not as many injuries. I'm going to update a few that were sitting out already, but I'm going to roll through these. The most important one for a lot of fantasy managers out there, Cooper Kupp left the game late in the fourth quarter with an ankle injury. No updates. He's going to be undergoing testing this week. You better cross your fingers, Kupp owners, that it's not a high ankle sprain. They have not said what it was, but he did not return. It was, from what I understand, I did not watch the game. From what I understand, listening and hearing other analysts talk, it was pretty much a senseless play where the Rams had already lost the game and Cooper Kupp was out there, and it seemed like they were just trying to get him more stats. As a fantasy manager, you probably appreciate that, but the fact that he come out with an ankle injury on a game that they didn't have a chance to win is pretty disappointing that their coaching staff let that happen. So Cooper Kupp, ankle injury, watch the practice report and the news coming out on that and cross your fingers. Another real key injury. One of the only 2 good tight ends in the whole league, apparently, Mark Andrews, left the game in the second quarter with a shoulder injury. Really disappointing because he came in immediately, was showing an impact. Thursday night, was catching the ball all over the place. I think he only had like 3 catches, but it was in like the first 2 possessions for like 40 yards or something like that. And then he goes out, he hit the ground kind of hard. You seen him go off to the sideline, went to the tent, didn't come back. And then he came out after halftime and he was in plain clothes. So really disappointing for Andrews. They're saying it's not a major, it's a minor injury at best. I would just keep an eye out. He has until Monday night to get healthy. They're playing at the Saints, but then also on turn, that's kind of a tough thing for you because if you don't get his backup, Isaiah Likely, then you might be waiting on Mark Andrews left hanging out to dry if he gets ruled out. But it gives you plenty of time for him to get back and possibly play. So it's kind of a wait and see what they say about testing and all that and how he practices throughout the week. Next will be Deebo Samuel, hamstring injury, ended up getting ruled out. We kind of had a good feeling that was going to happen. Didn't matter. Their offense looked great against the Rams. So there's no need for them to rush him back. Plus they're going to be on a bye this week. So it gives him a whole nother week. I would just keep an eye out for practice going up to week 10 because he's going to be out for a bye, which is good news for Deebo Samuel owners. They give them time to let him get healthy. Next going to be Jamar Chase. Ended up getting, we talked a little bit about this last week, left the game at the end with a hip injury. There wasn't any news then. After we did the updates, we kind of updated on Start Sit Pod ended up coming out. He's got a hairline fracture in his hip and a torn labrum. They decided they were not going to put him on IR, which is great, which means they think he'll come back within 4 weeks, which is kind of scary because neither one of these injuries to me sounds like something you would come back within 4 weeks of. But, maybe they know something that we don't. He's a super dynamic player, and a hip injury for a wide receiver for somebody that's as dynamic as he is huge. So even when he does come back at first, he'll probably be limited, and I would not count on him being as explosive or putting up the stats that you're used to out of Jamar Chase. So hold your breath, but I would not expect him back for at least 2 to 3 weeks at the minimum. I would think he's going to be after 4 weeks, but they're not putting him on IR, so we'll just have to wait and see. Next is going to be just following up on Mike Williams. Had that high ankle sprain after last week. They said it's going to be a minimum of 4 weeks for him. They have not put him on IR yet, but I expect that to probably happen this week. They were on bye last week, so I don't think that really counts for IR slots. So I think they'll put him on bye this week. Could be that they didn't put him on IR because they had their bye and that counted that week. So that means he's got 3 more weeks of games that he will miss. So I would just keep an eye out for him and see how he does in the next couple weeks. But I would definitely not expect to have him in this week coming up. And then that follows up with Keenan Allen. Honestly, they said he didn't recur a setback after they played. They had a bye, so I expect him back this week, but he didn't look 100%, said he didn't have his burst, which isn't good, so maybe taking him longer to heal. He's got a long history of hamstring injuries, so I would expect him back, but I would temper my expectations on his performance coming out of the bye even, because I think it's just taking him longer to get over this than they expected. And then moving on then to Zeke, they ended up with a knee contusion. They ended up ruling him out, and they ended up diagnosing him with a grade 2 MCL sprain. They're going on a bye this week, which is good for Zeke owners because that gives him an extra week. I just wait and see if he comes back. Honestly, I would expect him to come back because he's that type of player. Hadn't missed a practice or a game until this week since week 14 or 15 of 2020. So that's, just kind of shows you of him kind of pushing through injury to play as much as he can. With him having a sitting out and a bye week this week, I probably expect him to be back in week 10, but I just wait and see. Moving on, Darren Waller ended up getting ruled out. Hasn't been an update. Didn't play against the Saints. I just watch for practice to see if he comes back. He's got a history of hamstring injuries, so they haven't said if it has a certain grade to it or what their expectations are. But just keep a watch out for practice schedule this week. Next will be James Conner. Ended up getting ruled out with a rib injury, which we thought that was going to be good news for Eno Benjamin owners, which he ended up kind of underperforming with around 8 points this week. But James Conner got limited practices in the last 2 practices, or 2 or 3 the last week, and then got ruled out. I was kind of surprised. I guess he just wasn't quite back to where they wanted him to be. So I really expect him to come back this week and play. And that's pretty much, honestly, I think, Benjamin has a small role, but I think it's going to be the James Conner show. Moving on, Alan Lazard, left shoulder injury, got ruled out fairly early last week. I think it was around Wednesday or Thursday, which was really surprising because they made it seem like he was not as banged up as that seemed, because normally when you get ruled out that early, it's a fairly, I wouldn't say a severe injury, but it's, if it was like a mild injury, you would have more of a chance to play. It's probably more moderate to severe injury with his shoulder, but they have not specified what is going on with his shoulder. No update. I'd watch for practice schedule this week coming up. They're playing, let's see, they are playing, hang on, I got it right down here somewhere. Yes, they're playing at Detroit this week, which is a great matchup for him. If he comes back, I'd probably start him no matter what, especially with their woes at wide receiver and injuries. They had Christian Watson go down with a concussion also, and he'll probably likely to be out after seeing the hit. So if Alan Lazard does come back, I'd fire him up for sure, but I'd watch for his practice schedule at the end of this week. David Njoku, just following up, left ankle injury, got diagnosed with a high ankle sprain, going to miss 2 to 5 weeks. Nothing else really to say about that. They have not played yet because I'm really anxious to see how Harrison Bryant is featured in this offense after Njoku was featured so heavily. But we'll see. He's definitely going to miss this week and next week because that's the minimum 2 weeks. But I would expect more than that. Moving on to Michael Thomas. Honestly, this is just super disappointing as a Saints fan. Toe injury, foot injury, it doesn't matter. Whatever. I mean, wouldn't be shocked if he went and filed for disability or something like that. There's no update. They're not saying anything. He didn't practice up to the game this week. If he doesn't start practicing this week sometime and is out, and they don't update on the severity or if he re-injured it during his rehab or if he has been rehabbing, if they don't update anything, there's going to be a lot of questions for Dennis Allen to answer for Michael Thomas being out. And I think there's going to be there's going to be a ton of really upset Saints fans, even the ones that were in Michael Thomas's corner. Unlike myself, who I was not in. I've been a proponent of trading him for like the last 2 years, and we still have not done that. He's got a hefty contract, which probably goes to show why we can't trade him. But honestly, at this point, we're just wasting a roster spot. We could pick up Joe Blow off the street, and he could have more catches than Michael Thomas is having right now. So we'll just have to see. No updates. We'll see if there's an update if he comes back to practice or not, but no update at this time. Rashad Bateman came and played with his foot injury. Unfortunately, on one of my teams, I was suckered into starting him because I thought he had some upside in that game. And he played maybe the first 2-3 possessions and then did not show up again. And apparently he re-aggravated that foot injury during the game. There has been no update on the severity of it and their outlook, but it does not look good at all for Rashad Bateman. Honestly, I'd be shocked if he didn't go to the IR just because he's the future of their wide receiver position and just kind of like Dobbins, and he just re-aggravated that injury. I think they're going to give him plenty of time off. I would look for him to go to IR, but there's been no update at this time. Secondly, a guy we haven't talked about in a while, but's looking to come back from injury. That's Cordero Patterson. He's been on IR with a knee injury. There's been some workout videos that he's posted to his Instagram, Twitter, something like that. And he's like just killing his rehab right now, looking like a beast. So I would expect him to come back to practice because he's eligible this week. I'd expect him to come back to practice. And honestly, I expect him to play this week because he knows the offense. He's been there. He's a veteran. Their running backs, Tyler Algier's been okay, only because he's been falling in the end zone. But I would look for Cordero Patterson to come back and step into that offense heavily. It's going to minimize Tyler Algier and Caleb Huntley's involvement in the backfield. I think they'll still both be involved, but neither are going to be fantasy relevant. But I think Cordero Patterson will be heavily involved, and because there's no reason for them, unless they decide to trade him, which could be a thing. If he comes back and looks good, he could be a trade piece, and in that case, you definitely want him anyway. But if Cordero Patterson comes back and practices, they say he's going to play, I'd fire him up this week. Gus Edwards, honestly, looked great. Ended up getting banged up in this game with a hamstring injury Thursday night. It's considered minor. Had some really good looking runs. I mean, just some runs that like had hands on him in the backfield, and he ended up breaking 2 or 3 tackles for like a 10-yard gain. Just looked like the dominant running back in this backfield for Baltimore. Kenyon Drake looked better. But Gus Edwards comes out with his hamstring injury. They said it's minor, but I'd watch for his practice schedule over the week. If he does not play, I like Kenyon Drake. He looked better. I don't know if he's going to be a workhorse. Justice Hill will be mixed in there, but Kenyon Drake looks like he could be a relevant fantasy play against the Saints on Monday night if Gus Edwards ends up getting ruled out. And then that pretty much wraps up our injury update. We're going to roll right on to our top waiver targets after week 8 that are owned in less than 60% of ESPN leagues. Number 1 on the list is going to be Khalil Herbert. Honestly, played against a tough Dallas defense and ran the ball great, outperformed David Montgomery. And his snap share is about what it's been looking like all year. Let's see, his snap share was, I take that back. His snap share was a lot less than what it's looked like all year. His snap share was 28%. I'm sorry, earlier I looked at the one from week before last against New England, 41. Snap share was 28%. but he pretty much touched the ball every time he got in the game. 16 carries, 99 yards, and a touchdown against the vaunted Dallas defense, and looked excellent. When you compare that to David Montgomery, who should honestly be on the trading block heavily with the way Khalil Herbert has looked and Chicago's season not really going anywhere. David Montgomery, 70% of the snaps, 15 carries, 53 yards. Terrible efficiency. 3 catches, 3 targets for 22 yards. And he lost a fumble in the game. Only 8 points. Honestly, they did the same thing they've been doing all year. Not really looking that great. David Montgomery, but Khalil Herbert showing him up. I think you got to pick up Khalil Herbert, even if you're not going to play him, but they're playing against Miami this week. A lot better matchup than Dallas. I think if David Montgomery didn't get traded sooner rather than later, I think they have to start rolling Khalil Herbert more and just trying to see what he's capable of. That way, if they do and they don't trade David Montgomery in the offseason, they, probably end up trading him after the season's over. But I love Khalil Herbert this week at home versus Miami. He just looks like the better back. He's more efficient, and he's got the better opportunity. Number 2 is going to be Gus Edwards at New Orleans, just because he looked so good. This is only if he's not ruled out with his hamstring injury and it's not severe. It's a volume play. He's the man, but he also looks good against with a good offensive line. It's a tough matchup at New Orleans because our defense looks a lot better in New Orleans, but it's volume. He's going to get the goal line work, and we know Lamar Jackson's going to move the ball some. It's just if New Orleans can create enough turnovers and stop them enough on third down. And then if Edwards is out, I like Drake. But once again, volume. Seems like Kenyon Drake looked a little bit better. It seems like Drake plays a lot better as a secondary running back than a primary, but Drake's going to get the volume with their woes at running back. So that's only if Edwards is out. That's at number 2. Number 3 at running back. This guy's a stash, but he is the man in Denver. Latavius Murray. He's going to be on bye, so that means he's going to get fresh. And then it doesn't matter who they're playing against coming off that bye. He's getting the work and the goal line work. And I think there could be a chance maybe they trade Melvin Gordon on their bye to one of these teams that needs a running back that's been dealing with some injuries, like Baltimore, which would kill Gus Edwards' value, but that could happen. But Melvin Gordon's still involved, but Latavius Murray is more involved and getting the goal line work. I like Latavius Murray for a stash after this bye, especially for the future buys coming up. Number 4, got to go with Kyron Williams for the Rams. He's another stash. He did not come off IR or come back to play this weekend, but they said he was practicing, looking good. Went through an extensive workout before the game, looked great. I would expect him to practice and probably be activated this week. They're playing at Tampa Bay, kind of a tough matchup, but honestly, Darrell Henderson just does not look like he's getting the job done in that backfield. Let me pull up his stats from last week. You got 4 carries, 16 yards, 2 catches for 14 yards. I don't know what else to say about it. An undrafted free agent rookie, Ronnie Rivers, comes out of nowhere off their practice squad and out carries Darrell Henderson, 8 carries, 21 yards, and out catches 4 for 4. I think they're just biding time till Kyron Williams can come back, and then he's going to be the featured back. Dead serious. They said he had a large role in camp before he got injured. Kyron Williams is going to be a major pickup, even if he doesn't get activated this week in the future. But I think you got to pick him up and play him when he does. That's my number 4. Number 5, going right back to the well, Rachaad White looked pretty good. Another safe floor, around 7 points this past week. Leonard Fournette emerged once again without injury, but Tampa Bay still looks kind of like they're just trying to figure it out. They're looking better, but they're still losing games. Tom Brady still doesn't look like himself, but Rachaad White looks good when he's in there. He's another stash. I'm going to keep putting him on here till he's owned enough because he's going to hit this year at some point. And he's providing fairly decent flex low flex value for you in bye weeks at around 7 or 8 points with his catch potential and him, if he does get any goal line work, then that gives you the opportunity of a touchdown. Number 6, this guy's on bye. If he wasn't on bye, he would be above Rachaad White. That's going to be Jaylen Warren. Honestly, just looked a lot more efficient and a lot better than Najee Harris, which is crazy to say. Jaylen Warren's been on there before. We kind of took him off because they cut his usage back a little bit. Still wasn't a lot higher than it normally is, but he was just so efficient. 29% snap share, but 6 carries, 50 yards on the rushing against a Philadelphia defense is good. Then 3 targets, 3 catches for 25 yards, another solid average. Let me give you some of Harris's. I mean, I just hate to be like that with Harris because he was such a high draft pick, looks so good. But Harris, 71% snap share, but 8 carries, 32 yards, not that great, but 6 catches, 6 targets, 26 yards. Once again, we're just talking about efficiency here. Jaylen Warren looks to be a lot more efficient. I really don't think Pittsburgh has anything to play for this year. They just don't. They look like one of those teams that needs to mail it in. I would say you just kind of, say that Najee Harris is banged up with his foot injury still. Sit him. Let him stay healthy. He's still super young. Let Jaylen Warren prove something, and then it might be a 1A, 1B situation in the future as this team gets healthier. But I like Jaylen Warren coming off the, coming out of the bye. Maybe they decide to do something like that. Maybe they don't with Najee Harris. But maybe they end up trading Jaylen Warren, and he goes to a really good running back. I mean, a running back, a needy team, and gets a lot more work. But I like him. He's going into a bye, so he's definitely a big time stash. Would not be somebody that you have to pick up, but maybe think about after this week. And then this guy's probably ahead of him, but I didn't have him listed that way, but he probably is. That's going to be Dearness Johnson for the Cleveland Browns. Right now, he's the number 3 running back on the team behind Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Everybody knows that Hunt is one of the biggest running back trade targets in the NFL right now. If he gets traded, Dearness Johnson, I think, gets more work than Hunt's getting right now. I think they're just slow rolling Hunt to keep him healthy. Dearness Johnson has proven in the past with carries. He can catch the ball. He can carry the ball. He's a fairly efficient runner, just like the other two. Honestly, Cleveland's just got a wealth at running back. And there's also been some talk, maybe Cleveland hangs on to Hunt, goes back to playing him more, and trades Dearness Johnson to a running back needy team. And if that's the case, Dearness Johnson would still have a lot of value. So I really don't think you can go wrong with stashing Dearness Johnson. He's going into a bye next week. Maybe the trade happens during their bye week next week. Who knows? But I think he's somebody you got to think about stashing that way if Hunt gets traded or Dearness Johnson gets traded out of Cleveland. And that pretty much wraps up the running back segment. We're going to move right on to the wide receiver segment. And number 1, by far, without a shadow of a doubt, for me, is going to be Josh Palmer. They're coming off a bye. He was out with a concussion before the bye. He should be plenty cleared going into the bye. They have not updated anything about him yet. But with Mike Williams going down for a minimum of 4 weeks, Keenan Allen being banged up, and he might be back, but he's still somewhat – he's still not 100%. I think Josh Palmer's got a volume through the roof against the worst pass defense in the NFL at Atlanta coming up. Josh Palmer needs to be, and I had him on here to pick him up beforehand last week. So if you didn't pick him up and he's still out there, you got to pick him up this week, and you fire him into that wide receiver 2 slot, just like you've been doing Mike Williams. I think he's got huge potential this week. Number 2, Rondale Moore. Had a big week, super involved in the offense this week. He's playing at Seattle, he's playing at home against Seattle, which is good because you don't have to worry about the weather. But super involved this week, even with DeAndre Hopkins and Ertz out there. He played 99% of the snaps against Minnesota. That's huge. 8 targets, 7 catches, 92 yards, and a touchdown. Didn't even get his rushes. He typically gets some rushes here and there. They do not have him down. Let's see. Yeah, did not have him down for any rushes but I don't think he had any during the game. So, and he typically gets some handoffs here and there. He's kind of a gadget player, but I think you got to roll back with Rondell Moore. He's playing at home against Seattle. Should be a shootout and a good matchup to play him in. That's my number 2 wide receiver pick. Number 3 is going to be Romeo Doubs. Honestly, he's been on here before. He kind of fell out with, because Green Bay has no idea what they're doing at their wide receiver game. And honestly, this is just volume based. He had a decent game this past week, caught a touchdown. Like, I think he had 3 catches for like 60 yards or something and touchdown. Hang on, I'll update you on that. But Christian Watson went down and he was supposed to be featured this week and went down in the first quarter early with a concussion. Will probably be ruled out for next week. But Romeo Doubs playing at Detroit, big plus matchup, probably the second or third worst pass defense in the NFL. And we know Detroit can score the ball. So I expect this to be a shootout. Anyway, Doubs, 7 targets, 4 catches, 62 yards and a touchdown. So pretty decent week this past week. Not one that you would, want to start every week because the volume's just not there every week. But I think it's going to be there against Detroit. And with the bye weeks, I think you can do worse than picking up Romeo Doubs and plugging him in. And then even more so if Allen Lazard gets ruled out because he's banged up right now. I think if Lazard comes back, he's still the one. But I think Doubs still has enough volume playing against a banged up Detroit defense to warrant being picked up. Number 4. Going to be Kadarius Toney. This is pretty much just a shot in the dark. I'm not a big Kadarius Toney fan just because of what happened in New York. I feel like that was probably more him than New York, but who knows? I was not there. I don't know anybody personally there to speak for either one, but Kansas City's seen something in Kadarius Toney. And honestly, Kadarius Toney, if you've ever seen him play, he is a Tyreek Hill-esque player. Somebody who we thought Sky Moore might be, and this is probably a big ding for Sky Moore because I think if he does play a lot, he takes a lot of his touches away. But Kadarius Toney, pick him up just in case he plays. If he does, he could be flex worthy because it's a plus matchup at home against Tennessee, who's a terrible pass defense. But he came in before the bye week, so he had plenty of time to get acclimated to the offense and they might have some, knowing Andy Reid being the brilliant offensive mind that he is, he's probably going to have some packages in there for Kadarius Toney as explosive as he is. So I would pick up Kadarius Toney as a speculative ad this week, and I might even think about throwing him in there at flex if I'm hurting for needing somebody for an upside play. And last but not least, Alec Pierce seemed like he emerged as the 1B or the number 2 to Michael Pittman over Paris Campbell with Sam Ehlinger in there. He's got a tough matchup at New England this week. I say tough. Really, it's not as tough as it used to be. New England's playing a lot better than they have played in the past against the secondary, but they're playing at New England, which is not good, especially this time of the year. It can be really cold. And Sam Ehlinger has showed us that he's not the best passer, but Alec Pierce emerged. He's just got the potential. I think if they end up trading for a quarterback or letting Nick Foles play, I think Alec Pierce is going to be somebody that could shine in the future. I think he's worth a pickup for a possibility in the future if they go to Nick Foles. And that pretty much wraps up our wide receivers. Moving on to tight end. Honestly, there's a couple decent ads this week. Could be for the long term. Number 1 is going to be, without a shadow of a doubt, Isaiah Likely for Baltimore. Really showed out Thursday night after Andrews went down with a awesome stat line. Let me get it pulled up here for you. Let's see. 7 targets, 6 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown. Honestly, it seemed like it was even bigger than that. He's a huge wide receiver, super athletic. He's 6'4", 241, super athletic, by far more athletic than Andrews, which is impressive. But I really think the chemistry him and Lamar Jackson showed, I think he's your number 2 pass catcher in with Rashad Bateman being out. Nobody else really stepping up. I think he's your number 2 pass catcher in Baltimore, even when Andrews comes back. And he's a tight end. I think his upside is that with Taysom Hill right now. Didn't have that big of a game as it seemed when you watched him play, but if Andrews is out, he's a top 3 tight end, probably without a doubt, even against a tough New Orleans defense. Number 2 is going to be Tyler Conklin. Sorry. We know he can do it. He has done it in the past. And then Zach Wilson came back. He kind of fell off, especially with Ozuma coming back. But this week he really showed out. It looked like him and Zach Wilson had a lot of good chemistry going against tough New England defense. 10 targets, 6 catches, 79 yards, and 2 touchdowns. You really like the red zone targets. But I mean, it was a team high 10 season high, and I believe it was a team high 10 targets. You really like that with a young quarterback in Zach Wilson and a fairly young tight end in Tyler Conklin. I think he's somebody that's got to be picked up. Has a kind of a tough matchup against Buffalo. Honestly, Buffalo's tough all around, but tight end is one of those positions that kind of hurts them. So I think it could be a shootout anyway, because Buffalo's going to be scoring. So I think that New York's going to have to throw the ball, and I think that could be good news for Tyler Conklin. And then third, got to be Taysom Hill again. Honestly, what else do you need to see? He did not put up major points, but he's heavily involved in the offense, passing, running, and throwing the ball. He didn't get in the end zone, which is why he probably wasn't as high as he normally is as far as his point count, but looked really good, came out healthy. It seems like their offense is really getting I guess somewhat of a chemistry going. But I mean, 2 targets, 1 catch for 11 yards. And then he ran the ball 10 times for 61 yards. Normally, if he just runs the ball 10 times, he's fallen in the end zone, at least one of them. Didn't happen. But then he also, I don't know if he had to throw a pass or not this week. It doesn't say. I thought, oh, yeah, he did. He completed his lone pass for 2 yards. So, I mean, he's just getting heavily involved. He's got that upside for a top tight end. You just put him in there, you plug him in, and he's playing at home against Baltimore this week. Pretty solid matchup again, but he's just one of those, you put him in there, you just hope that he goes off, and if he doesn't, he seems like he's got a pretty safe floor at this time. Number 4 is going to be Evan Ingram. We talked about him last week, had another solid performance this week against a really tough Denver defense. This week he gets coming up, he's playing at home against the Raiders, who we've seen are a pretty terrible defense, as we've seen it, New Orleans put up 24 on them at home. Honestly, this is a get right for Jacksonville's offense, and I think Evan Ingram keeps it rolling against them. Number 5 and 6, these are 2 guys that have not played this week, but I still feel pretty confident in their opportunity and capability in their respective offenses, and that's going to be Hayden Hurst playing next week at home against Carolina. With Chase out, Burrow trusts him. They have a chemistry. I think that's a good opportunity no matter what happens this week. And Harrison Bryant, he's going to be on a bye, but I expect if he has a big game tonight, I think he's somebody you pick up while he's on the bye for your future buys for your tight end, and maybe play him until Njoku comes out. If he doesn't do anything tonight, don't worry about it. Cut him if you got him. Because he's had plenty of time to be acclimated. He's not like he hasn't played in this offense. He's had some relevant weeks even early in the year when Njoku wasn't as relevant. So if he doesn't put up this week, then you just get rid of him. And that wraps up my tight end. Moving on to quarterback. Number 1's got to be Justin Fields playing at home against Miami. I mean, the guy has done it 2 weeks in a row against 2 tough defenses in New England, and then Dallas, probably the best defense, put up, 30-something points against Dallas's defense. His rushing floor is what really holds him true. But, yeah, against probably one of the best defenses in the league, 17 pass completions for 23 attempts. Not a lot, but 151 yards, 2 touchdowns, 8 rushes, 60 yards, and a rushing touchdown. And he was sacked 4 times, which is pretty much where his average is, but with a rushing touchdown, that's pretty, not surprising. But he didn't turn the ball over. The guy's been fumbling the ball like crazy. He's only lost 1 all year, but he's been fumbling the ball like crazy. Didn't do it this week, and if he keeps that going, playing against a Miami team that is just terrible against, honestly, at all facets of defense because they're so banged up. But 3 weeks in a row, he's had 25 or more fantasy points, and 2 of them were against tough defenses in New England, Dallas, and now he's got Miami, Detroit, Atlanta, and then the Jets. So 3 solid matchups for Justin Fields. I think he's somebody, if you're struggling at quarterback, you pick him up and you can play him for at least the next 3 or 4 weeks and maybe the rest of the season if he keeps running the ball this much. Number 2 is going to be Marcus Mariota. Did it again at home against Carolina this week in kind of a shootout, really busted it open in overtime, which sometimes you don't really want to count those stats because they're not going to be there every week. But he's playing at home against the Chargers. They're coming off a bye, so they should be healthier, but they've been pretty terrible all year on defense. They were supposed to be probably the best defense in the NFL, and they've had some really key injuries at corner, linebacker, and defensive line that have really held them back. I think Marcus Mariota with his rushing upsides, kind of like Justin Fields, it's a good floor for you. If you're looking for a fill-in, I think you can do worse than Marcus Mariota. He's my number 2. Number 3 would be number 2 for me, but Andy Dalton, I think it's just a tougher matchup than Marcus Mariota has. Playing at home against Baltimore, look good again. Solid, top 10 fantasy numbers as a quarterback this week, I think. Tougher defense, which is why he's 3. But Andy Dalton, I think you do worse than picking him up and streaming, and hopefully he'll get back Jarvis Landry or Adam Troutman or Michael Thomas this week. We'll just have to see. But either way, their offense looks like it's really got some chemistry going. Number 4, Trevor Lawrence had a really down week this past week. He's still got the potential with an offensive-minded head coach in Doug Peterson. They're finally getting a good, solid matchup this week. They had a tough one last week, playing overseas. Playing overseas against Denver. Honestly, I don't like those overseas games, and it seemed like it really affected him. But this week they're playing at home versus Las Vegas. This is a good right game, or you cut him and don't think about streaming him until he starts putting up numbers again. But I think Trevor Lawrence gets it done this week against Vegas at home. Number 5 is going to be Jared Goff. He did it. He came through. We thought he would. He came through this week, had a solid game, not a blow-up game like they've been doing, but had a solid game. And his offense, as far as we could tell, is everybody emerged healthy, and they're getting healthier. So, but this week they're playing against at home, which you don't have to worry about weather, home field advantage for them, against a struggling Green Bay team that honestly looks like their locker room's just out of sorts. And we'll see if Aaron Rodgers can get them back on track. If they do, it's going to be a shootout because Detroit's defense is so terrible. But Jared Goff, number 5, I think you'd do worse streaming than picking him up and streaming him. And then last but not least, somebody I talked about at the beginning, Jimmy Garoppolo. He's going to be on a bye this week. Obviously, you're not streaming him on a bye, but I think you should pick him up and stash him. He could be a rest of this season play with this offense with CMC, but if not, you pick him up, stash him for somebody that you have going on by in the future. And that rounds out my quarterbacks. Moving on, last but not least, my defensive kicker. Defense, New England versus the Colts at home. Sam Ellinger looked not that great. New England's defense is going to eat his lunch. Let's be honest. Everybody's focusing on Jonathan Taylor, and New England's defense looks like it's kind of getting in its groove, and Indianapolis's offense is in turmoil. So I like New England's defense as number 1 streamer this week. Number 2, this one's kind of out of there, but Minnesota at Washington. Minnesota's defense is getting better, and Taylor Heineke's he's been okay, but it was against the Colts defense, but he still threw a pick. Minnesota's defense has been getting pressure on the quarterback. I like Minnesota at Washington this week. And then last but not least for defenses, Kansas City at home versus Tennessee. Kansas City's on a bye. They're getting healthy. Their offense has been great. Also, Kadarius Toney, I expect him to possibly be involved in special teams, which could be a big boost for you on kick and punt returns. Also, Malik Willis looked terrible. If he ends up playing again this week against Kansas City defense, I just think that's a big boost for Kansas City's defense. Even if not, their offensive line in general has been terrible. I think, even if Tannehill comes back, I think they get a lot of pressure, fair amount of sacks, and also the run stopping ability of Chris Jones in the heart of that Kansas City defense. Even though I know Derrick Henry is almost unstoppable, Chris Jones is one of those people that could probably stop him with Tennessee's offensive line being as rough as it is. So I like Kansas City at number 3 this week, coming off their bye at home against Tennessee. And that rounds out my defensive streamers. And then we're going to roll to kicker. Number 1 is going to be Jason Myers for me. Really did it well this week. We had him on there last week. Now he's playing at Arizona in the Dome. Should be another shootout. So I like Jason Myers this week for Seattle. Number 2 is going to be Michael Badgley for Detroit. He has already passed his bye, so he could be somebody you roll with the rest of the season. He's playing in a dome at home this week against Green Bay. Number 3 is going to be Ryan Suckup for Tampa Bay, playing at home against the Rams. Honestly, he had a really down week and then bounced back well last week with a top 5 performance, I believe, or maybe top 10, barring what happens with Cincinnati and Cleveland tonight. But Ryan Suckup this upcoming week playing at home against the Rams. I think they have a lot of success with him kicking field goals. And then last but not least, my man, Younghoe Koo kicks the game winner for Atlanta. I told y'all he was going to come through. He actually had a really good week, got himself back in the top 5 standings, playing at home against the Chargers this week coming up. I think he's another one you roll with, and you could do worse if your kicker's on bye or if you're streaming kickers. That's going to round out my injuries and waiver podcast for after week 8. We appreciate everybody that listens. We welcome any feedback, any way you can get in touch with us. Please like, subscribe, and download our podcasts on Stitcher, Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, whatever you listen to your podcast on. We really appreciate that because that's how we get our ratings up is getting the downloads, the subscriptions. So we really appreciate all our followers out there, and we will come back to y'all with our studs, duds, and overachievers and start sits and sleepers later on in the week. And good luck on your fantasy week coming up. And if you have anything riding on Monday Night Football tonight, good luck on that as well. Y'all have a good week, and we will talk to y'all and come at y'all later.